startups, the visionaries, the late shift. This is Australia at work. 86% of all jobs in Australia are in a business, big or small. When business thrives, the whole country thrives.
There you go. Got everyone's attention at least. How do I use the microphone as well? Look, thank you all once again for coming along. Once again, my name's David Speers, and we've got a terrific lineup here to talk to you this afternoon, talk amongst themselves, take your questions as well. These Strong Australia forums that have been taking place for the last 12 months or so right across the country have been a terrific opportunity to talk about what's going on in dynamic regions like this one, but this obviously a region that's just suffered, had a real challenge thrown its way with the floods about 6 weeks ago. So we're going to be talking about that, but also longer term, what are the ideas, the strategies that are going to be required to deliver the sort of long-term growth that Townsville needs. Jennifer Westacott is the Chief Executive of the Business Council of Australia. James Baum is the Chief Executive Officer of Aon Australia. We also have some people you might know locally. Debbie Raines, the President of the Townsville Chamber of Commerce. Carl Valentine's the Managing Partner of PVW Partners. And I've gone in the wrong order there, but Trish, in the middle there, Patricia O'Callaghan is the Chief Executive Officer of Townsville Enterprise. Did I get everyone there? So I can't quite see you from where I'm sitting, but I know you're all there. Look, well, I'm going to commence a conversation here. Please have a think about some questions you might like to ask to anyone who's up here on stage, except for me. I'm not very good at answering questions. And we will get to some of those questions from the floor shortly. But I do want to start with, obviously, the focus of many in town at the moment. That's the recovery from what's happened here. And I've got to tell you, in the cab ride from the airport, I got a full 15 minutes on what is a big issue, I'm sure, for many, and that is insurance and insurance premiums. James, I'll get you to talk to this. Premiums here obviously have gone through the roof, already high, so high that many couldn't afford the contents insurance and so on. They needed to be covered. Give us a bit of an idea of, you're not an insurance company, but tell us what your company does and give us a sense of what those insurance companies, how they are approaching this particular issue.
So that's a great question to start with, straight into the firing line. So at Aon, we're an insurance broker, so we're here to serve the local community and business organisations understand their risk, to understand the types of insurance, if you like, that you should be thinking about buying, how much insurance you should be buying, and then obviously doing our very best to make that purchase as affordable as possible. So that is ostensibly the role that we play. It's, I always start these conversations with saying I'm certainly not an apologist for the insurance companies, if you like, and many of them will tell you that we actually may well be the opposite of that in terms of the role we play and the actions we take. But it is a complex issue. I mean, at the end of the day, if we think about North Queensland as the area, and in terms of the business that insurance companies are in, there is a tough fact that sits out there and says that more premium is spent in this part of Australia, but it delivers more claims than the rest of Australia.
So it is higher risk.
It is higher risk. So the statistic is that for every $1 of premium that's paid, about $1.40 is paid in claims. So that is an issue. But I think the insurance industry more broadly, would say that they acknowledge that they have a role to play in terms of making these products as affordable as they can, and that means they need to do more in terms of their sophistication, in terms of how they price risk. That is definitely there. But I think they would also point to the fact that they need to find a way, and I sort of underline the word find a way because it doesn't always feel that way, to collaborate with government, local communities on the underlying issues that go to mitigation of risk.
Do you think the insurance companies are in a similar category to the banks have been, and that is that there's not a lot of love, and we see when a big natural disaster like this happens, politicians jump all over them, and many in the community might feel the same. How do they deal with that? How do they get the love back?
Yeah, look, and I think that is the issue. I mean, trust is an underlying point, and one of the things that we work very hard and will continue to work hard, and I think we're getting closer to achieving that. And we were talking about it on our table down here, that there is a lack of trust from the community, and that's quite clear and palpable. But I'd say the accusation that I'd make to insurers is there's a lack of trust from them as well. So if you think about the complexity that sits around insurance policies, the way they're written, the ability for people to simply understand what they mean, they are designed primarily, you could argue, to weed out the very small percentage of claims that aren't claims, as opposed to the vast majority of instances that are absolutely are claims.
Debbie and Trish, I suppose to both of you, what is the latest in terms of the cost of these floods, the time it's going to take to recover, how that recovery is going? Are there enough tradies and others who are going to be needed to rebuild?
It's still going to be an ongoing challenge. We do have a lot of trades that are well and truly at capacity, so we do need to attract a lot more of that. But I guess one of the challenges right here and now is to be able to get businesses back into opening their doors and trading.
Are there many who aren't at the moment?
Yeah, there's still a high percentage, and the grants that have been set up to help these businesses get back are just not delivering what they were intended to do.
Tell me about that. What you're talking about, state and federal government grants aren't doing what they're meant to do?
No, great in intent to be able to give that money into a business to help them get back into trading. However, the documentation to complete these forms is quite arduous. It's 10 pages long. We've got a lot of businesses that are small to medium sized. They just simply don't have the resources to be able to complete them.
They just think it's not worth going through all of that.
Yep. And because it was a water event, a lot of the records have been destroyed. So they've to qualify for these particular grants, they've had to prove that they have been affected, and a lot of the businesses have just got on with it. They've called in friends, family, employees, just to pay the employees to keep them in employ, to clean up their shops and their offices, just so that they could keep trading.
Yeah, and look, obviously you can't have taxpayers' money thrown around willy-nilly. You've got to make sure the boxes are ticked. But if the grants aren't going, Trish, where they should be, there's something wrong, right?
Yeah, and obviously some of these concerns are definitely coming through, but I think to give you a bit of a picture on what we're experiencing here, Townsville and North Queensland were already structurally dealing with some major economic issues before this weather event. We ended 2018 with a lot of major announcements from state and federal government, and to have this happen at the start of 2019 has been a tragedy. And to give a bit of an outlook to the rest of Australia on what we're seeing, we've had 3,300 homes directly impacted. We've got 450 businesses that are either lost or displaced at this point in time. 50% of those businesses don't have flood cover, so they're really out on their own at this point in time, and we've got nearly $1 billion in claims that we're going to have to face. So this situation is pretty dire. Now, to give the Prime Minister and the Premier credit where credit's due, they were on the ground very quickly and they've announced these grants. There is definitely some issues with our businesses in particular. The graziers seem to be able to access their grants quite well, but there are some administrative barriers around the business grants. But I think the message we're saying to our government as well is let's not focus on the short term alone. We need to get people back in homes and our businesses up and running. But here is an opportunity to fix some major structural issues. And one in particular, if we're talking right now about water, during the height of it, when the water was going over the Burdekin Dam, over 16,000 cubic metres per second was going over that dam. And this is a city that's been dealing with drought for over 8 years. Exactly. So let's build the Hells Gates Dam and get on with it, because now's the time to do it.
Good point. I want to come back to that, and there'll be some support in the room for that. Jennifer Westacott, look, each natural disaster is different, and this one's had a particularly devastating impact on regions around Townsville. But sadly, it's not the first time we've seen a natural disaster in Australia. Give us some sense of the experience of, if you can, of other towns. How do you do, that have gone through a disaster, how do you do recovery right? What are some of the things to make sure are done and aren't done?
Well, I think the first thing is, you've got to do some immediate things like we've been arguing, and James has been very supportive of this, that to encourage the insurers to put the local tradespeople first, both in their insurance claims but also giving them priority in terms of accessing the work.
Is that happening?
We think that's starting to happen, and we're out looking with Joe today at some of his projects. But that you've got to balance the fact that some people want their homes and their businesses fixed quickly. They want to get back into them, as they should. But there is an opportunity to make sure that you don't lose economic opportunities by forgetting that if you put the local people first, you're actually going to help rebuild the economy.
Yeah, keep the money here.
Yeah, the second thing then, and I'm sure Deb and Trish will kind of back me up here, a lot of the issues were here before this. High youth unemployment, high unemployment. It's the city deal has got to go a bit further than it's gone. So what is the kind of, not just the infrastructure like the stadium, which is fantastic, but what's the infrastructure that's actually going to lead to economic development across the region? How do we actually make sure that we're putting in place the incentives for large companies to come back here and invest? I'm going to mention the word Adani, but let's not kind of make a decision about that from the comfort of the inner city suburbs of Melbourne and Sydney, forgetting that here people need those jobs, and they need all the things that flow from having a big investor like Adani. And then the final point I'd make is, and this is something Australia has to kind of shake itself out of. We know these events happen. The climate science tells us that they're going to happen more frequently and more severely. So why aren't we looking at the resilience of our infrastructure? Why aren't we doing things like storing our water, building some dams? We're not even allowed to talk about that. Why aren't we looking at investing in our river levees and things like that? Why aren't we doing that? Why do we always wait for a drought, which we know is a cyclical thing in Australia, to even have a discussion about water storage, about kind of pumping from the north to the south? I mean, these things just seem to be beyond us as a country, and yet at the end of the day, that's someone's farm that's lost, their business is lost. And the final thing is we've got to think about some of the town planning stuff here, and this is not just for here, across the country. If where are we putting housing? What kind of housing are we putting in? Where are we putting roads? Where are we releasing land? So that we're not kind of adding to some of these severe events.
Well, Carl, let me bring you in here, because we were talking a little earlier about using this opportunity to get infrastructure right, and you were talking about the Mount Isa rail link in particular. What needs to happen there?
Well, I think there's some real opportunities to change how we do things. So for mine, there's probably three key things that we really need to look at for regional development. First of all, we need enabling infrastructure and major projects. Secondly, we need alignment between our three levels of government to enable those projects and infrastructure to be delivered. And then finally, we need the right policy settings to ensure that the private sector can take advantage of the projects and infrastructure. We have a number of key opportunities here in the north, Adani being one of them. Hell's Gate Dam is a really important one, and the Mount Isa to Townsville railway line. We need alignment between the three levels of government to deliver those three key economic drivers for our region.
Well, and I should note we have the Mayor here with us today. That's one level of government. But tell me about the City Deal experience. This was the first City Deal done. Has it been a good deal so far? What do you think, Carl?
Yeah, look, I think it's been a good deal for Townsville as a city. But Townsville doesn't exist in isolation. We're part of the northwestern Queensland region, and we can't lift ourselves up by our own bootlaces here in Townsville. We actually need the whole region to be lifted up with that right kind of infrastructure so the whole region can benefit from it. So yeah, City Deal's good, but a regional deal would be fantastic.
All right, so you're talking about something bigger than just the city. And is there, well, perhaps anyone who might want to comment on this, have we seen with the City Deal so far perhaps some of the easier stuff to agree on move forward, but perhaps the harder stuff like Adani or we'll talk about a coal-fired power station as well, it's not so easy to get governments to agree?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference between how government works and how the private sector works. So my personal experience with the City Deals is fantastic that the port is getting some extra funding, fantastic that the water infrastructure is coming online, that we're getting a stadium. but there's still a lot of talk and not enough action on a couple of other key projects. And maybe Trish, you'd like to talk about that?
Yeah, I think the City Deal is a good policy platform, and I think with any policy platform, Dave, you just got to make it work, and I think we have done that as a region. I think for a city of our size to finally get to 50 million fully funded stadium, we've got 225 and another 200 coming for water. We've got the Port Channel widening 193. We've got defence and smart cities initiatives. You know, I think we're doing as well as we can to leverage that to our point. I think the Mayor would testify, has it been easy? No, but nothing ever is in politics. What I would say and agree with Carl is that let us also not forget our regions. Our North Queensland area and out to the northwest is so exceptionally important. We forget sometimes that the northwest is one of the richest mineral provinces in the world, and right now we've got a rail line that's been washed out, and you've got billions of product that is trying to find its way to our Townsville port, and it's excruciating and hitting the bottom lines of those companies significantly. So, you know, things like the Mount Isa to Townsville rail line, as much as it's one rail line, it's an absolute lifeblood to us. So I think that's where we do need to lift up our northwest regions. They're also fighting for a regional deal at the moment, and if they were to secure that, hopefully projects like that line will be completed.
I think there's this issue of long-term planning for the regions of Australia, and of course for our major cities. But you know, take New South Wales as a point. You know, that city deal has been incredible in Western Sydney, but the infrastructure that is going in New South Wales, the long-term planning around Western Sydney, the sense of kind of like a 15, 20-year horizon with some things going first and then now the sorts of things are following. That's what we need around the regions of the country, and for people not to be sort of, you know, unable to agree, even if something has got a 15-year.
Well, it's interesting you say that, right?
horizon.
Because Gladys Berejiklian just won in New South Wales at the state election on the weekend, but she was heavily criticised during the campaign for not having projects ready to cut the ribbon on, right?
Because it's better than not starting them at all.
Exactly, right? She got criticism for the fact they weren't too short term. She was looking long term. These projects have a longer scale.
I mean, if people kind of said we've got to, this is the problem with infrastructure planning, you know, let's have something so we can cut the ribbon before the election. That is not in the community's interest.
Exactly.
Have something that's going to solve the problems of congestion, of enabling infrastructure that allows economic development to happen. Have a vision, have a plan, and stick to it. And for the private sector, this chopping and changing of major priorities is lethal to investment, because big companies say, you know something, can't work out what the government's going to do about X, Y, and Z, so look, Australia's getting too hard, let's go somewhere else. Well, you know, that is very bad for our country, and this is what Strong Australia is about. Why can't we get a plan for this region, not just for Townsville? Why can't we prioritise infrastructure? Why can't we fast-track those planning approvals so that they're ready to go when the money follows? I don't understand why this is so hard.
A couple of these projects, and some of them have been mentioned here already. So Adani, right? Obviously there's mixed views around the country on Adani. But here, am I right to assume that there's a pretty strong view in support? What would it mean for the region, but for Townsville as well?
Oh, it would mean a lot of things, actually. One, there's a sense of hope. So there's still a lot of people. We've got a very high unemployment rate still here in this city, and a lot of that is youth unemployment. The fact that there is a project that will be a major employer for the region certainly does give a lot of that hope. That sends then messages that people have got a future in Townsville and in the region, so they will stay. They won't leave town, and that's one of the big issues that we're facing, is that when there's no hope, people will leave, and we already are struggling with skills shortages in a lot of areas. So that is one of the big benefits.
And how do you get heard on this? I mean, you know, I think credit to the Mayor, made it pretty clear what her views are on this nationally, but is it making a difference, do you feel? Do you think the town's being heard?
No, I don't think so at the moment, and I think we're all doing what we can to try and get the message heard, but I think what we need to be very clear about is the issue around Adani isn't necessarily about Adani. This is about coal and the future of coal and how important it is to these regional areas and areas like ours. It's a core part of our DNA, David, and I think what we get frustrated on is when we live by these coal basins and these minerals basins, you know, we find that balancing act, yet then we get lectured by people in Melbourne that are driven primarily their energy by brown coal-fired power stations. I think that's where we become really frustrated. But we're not being adversarial about it. I think this is about a lack of education around our country on this issue. It's about understanding that we don't need to have an ideological battle. We can transition. No one is saying that climate change isn't happening, but can we face it in a more pragmatic way and bring our community on? For a long time, we've got people in our community, this is their lifeblood. This is they are proud to be part of the mining industry, and we can't just rip that away from them.
Yeah, Carl, did you want to add?
I'll just add, David, that you are on safe ground in saying that the people of Townsville support the Adani project. The last PVW Partners Business Confidence Survey, 85% of the respondents said that they saw the Adani project as a key plank to Townsville's economic recovery.
That's not exactly a close result.
No.
Well, James, let me get your thoughts as someone who doesn't live here. You'd be well aware that there are very diverse views down south about Adani, but as someone who's in the risk business, how would you see the chances of this actually becoming a reality?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So if we're talking specifically about Adani, and so certainly environmental groups worked very hard with the banking sector, and the banking sector have ostensibly said they'll walk away, and Adani said, that's okay, we can finance it. Now, the environmental groups have turned to the insurance industry. So they've sort of worked out that if you can't insure something, it won't get built.
So they're feeling the same pressure.
Yeah, so there's a lot of campaigns. We've been singled out as well in terms of our position on this, and so I think from a
and how much pressure does that apply to a company like yours?
Well, for us, it's a little bit different to some of our competitors because we are present in North Queensland. So we have a vibrant business in North Queensland. So for us to come out and say from Sydney that we don't support projects like Adani, I might as well tell David to shut the office down in Townsville, because the mining, the mineral sector is completely connected. It's not a ripple effect, and we were talking about that at the table. You don't need to understand too much about basic economics to know that the two things are intrinsically linked. So we certainly see our role is to provide risk consulting services to the likes of Adani and many other coal mining companies more broadly. But one of the things that is certainly coming down the pipe, and it is out there, and we were talking about this last night, is particularly out of Europe, where a number of large international insurers are based. There is a mounting pressure for insurers to stop insuring coal.
Yeah.
Thermal coal in particular. Coking coal seems to be sort of sitting to the side
So it's
a little bit.
It's a
global push, and we're getting pushed hard on it. But yeah, we see our role to help projects like Adani actually get up.
All right. Well, Jennifer, you're well tapped in politically. You've seen this issue over many years now. In fact, the polls will indicate Bill Shorten will be Prime Minister pretty soon, but his party is absolutely torn on this. What do you think's going to happen?
Yeah, look, I think this is a very important issue to get right. What do we want to achieve in the climate change space? We want to achieve a more carbon efficient economy. We want to, for each unit of economic output, we want to be the most efficient economy in the world. What we've ended up as a debate is coal versus renewables versus. Not saying, what's the end point here? The end point here is to try and get technological change to be that most efficient carbon economy in the world, to keep jobs in areas like this, to grow jobs in areas like this, to keep our industries active, to get that transition to a lower carbon economy, but not to, in the process, basically deindustrialise the economy. This is only going to get achieved through innovation driven by investment, driven by certainty. And that's the kind of misunderstanding that I think has happened. And then it gets down to these kind of Orwellian sort of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad thing. Coal is bad, renewables are good, this is bad, this is good. And then people not willing to look at the data. Well, actually, if you believe that, then why won't you support gas, which is 50% more efficient than coal-fired power? Oh, we don't like gas either. Well, why won't you support nuclear? We hate nuclear. So to me, we've got to kind of get back to basics. We want to be a carbon efficient economy, we want to be a lower carbon economy, but that is not about picking winners in the technological space.
Well, picking winners is kind of what the government's been doing this week. They've announced a short list of energy projects, and one of them is just down the road, the Collinsville coal-fired power plant, which I think was finally decommissioned last year. They're talking about a new high-tech coal plant, a high-efficiency, low-emission coal plant there. What do you think about that idea?
Well, some of those projects were actually not too bad this week. I mean, there were some gas projects there. I think, you know, as you and I have talked about many times, if you're going to underwrite things, you've got to decide why government does that. I mean, why are we in this mess? We're in this mess because of government policy creating such uncertainty that, you know, they basically switched off investors investing in these projects. But the big priority has got to be keeping the existing coal-fired power stations open and keeping the coal supply to them. But every time governments underwrite a project, they're basically pushing the private sector out, and ultimately the risk falls to the taxpayer.
There's a hell of a lot of solar investment going on around here, right, Trish? There's a huge amount, in fact, if you look across the region.
Yeah, and I think that's something, you know, we're also very proud of, and we want to talk about transition. It's happening. We've had, since 2016, over 800 megawatts of solar projects be commissioned or completed. We've got about 4,000 megawatts that are coming down the pipeline.
How would they feel if a new coal plant opens up?
Well, I think at the end of the day, the market will test that. But what we're saying is, you know, at the moment, let's look at the end game. The end game is affordable, reliable power for our businesses and the people of our communities. We absolutely don't have that at the moment. So trying to find a way, and I applaud the government if they're going to look into the feasibility of this Collinsville project and it can prove up that it can give us reliable power, well, then let's get on with it. But at the moment, you know, there is a lot of conversations about downward pressure on prices, you know, solar projects coming on board. This has fueled our economy over the last few years. Our renewable energy projects have been brilliant. But, you know, we're agnostic to the source because at the moment we still have not achieved the outcome.
Yeah, just need the cheaper power prices. Well, I was just going to ask back on Adani, Jennifer, how does a community like Townsville make itself heard at a pretty important time with an election upon us? We know the anti-Adani crowd are heard, you know, nearly every day. How do we get a louder voice for this town?
I think there's three things to be done here. One is to get the facts out about this project, and you know, I'm staggered by the misrepresentation of it in the south. So that'd be one thing that I would encourage people to do. The second thing is to be very clear about this community's support for it, and to Deb's point, the flow-on effects that are going to come from it. And you know, people forget that you do a big project like this, all sorts of things happen. It creates the economies of scale to kind of re-energise some stuff at TAFE. It creates the mining services industry that's actually very substantial. It creates the small businesses that hang off all of those other industries.
And is all of this better prosecuted not by Adani, the company, but by this town?
Maybe this town, this chamber, because I think the fact base is really important. The misinformation's got to be corrected. The flow-on effects have got to be sorted. But the other thing I would do is you've got to hold politicians of all persuasions to account. They can't turn up here and say, well, we kind of care about Adani, and then when they're in a marginal seat in inner city Sydney, we're not really convinced by this.
They wouldn't do that, would they?
You know, you've got to hold people, and I'm not making a, you know, partisan
right.
comment here. I'm just saying everyone does this.
Yeah.
They turn up to these communities which are marginal seats and they say, we're very open to it. Then they go somewhere else and they say, we're very concerned about it. You know, you need certainty here, and that is not the kind of pathway. But I look at the bigger picture here too, David. You know, the message that sends to international investors all the time about the sovereign risk of investing in this country is terrible. And so I have companies, huge companies, saying to me, boy, it's getting hard to understand how Australia's going and whether we should invest money here. And if you can't get money into Australia, you can't get money into Townsville.
Well, Debbie, I'll just get you to take up the point there from Jennifer about how you better prosecute the community voice on something like Adani at election time. Do you think there's more that the local community can do to push that case?
I think we're starting to get our voice heard. We are the most marginal seat in the country, so we need to take advantage of that, which I believe we are doing. Certainly, the facts, as Jennifer said, is getting the facts out. I mean, it needs to be loud and strong, and we are starting to do that. But I think we're all on the same page here. It's just keeping that message at every opportunity we can.
And on those politicians, Trish, obviously it's a very tight seat. What was the margin? 37 votes.
Yeah.
Do you feel like a lot comes at election time and then not much else after? Is that the...
Obviously a lot does come at election time, but I think consistently, because of the way our economy has been structured and the challenges that we've had, I've got to say that there has been a lot of commitments made at state and federal level. So, you know, it has been positive to see that. I think, David, the only way this issue will really move is if the rest of Australia come on the journey with us. Because if you look at the numbers alone, you've got 1 million people above the Tropic of Capricorn, you've got 24 underneath it. That's where the voting power is. We can do what we can in these marginal seats, but it's much more powerful and influential if the rest of the country can hear this message. And unfortunately, we do what we can with our advocacy activities now. We take the message down to Brisbane and Canberra. It was only in August we took 90 of our business leaders with our 5 mayors and our politicians down to Canberra, and you know, a couple of months after that we had about $425 million of commitments made outside of an election cycle. So I think
not a bad result.
It's not a bad result, but I think what we're saying is, if the region we're so passionate is that it's about what's good for Australia, and a really strong north is really good for a strong Australia. The opportunities are here. Asia is on our doorstep. With the right infrastructure and the right investments, this can be very beneficial for this country as a whole, but we need the rest of Australia to come on that journey with us.
Jennifer, let's come back to the micro. There is, as we've noted, a higher unemployment here than the rest of the country, higher than there should be. There are skills gaps when we talk about these big projects, and also the reconstruction at the local level as well after the floods. What can be done to address those skills gaps, get particularly young unemployed into the jobs that are needed?
Yeah, this is why I'm advocating for doing something like this lifelong skills account, where you let people take a module of something and they purchase it from a university or they purchase it from a TAFE. That, in our view, will kind of re-energise TAFE a bit, because what you can't have as people trying to skill up is they can't go back and do another undergraduate degree or a Certificate 3 or a Certificate 4. They've got to quickly assemble a set of skills and a set of qualifications, but they have to be sort of what's called the micro-credentials, where they can assemble a group of those and suddenly they are able to get access to particular parts of the labour market. That's essential in places like Townsville. So we've got 14% youth unemployment here. That's very high. I mean, youth unemployment across the country is too high. But we've got to find a faster way of people reskilling, staying in work and being able to get new jobs.
Yeah, and as you say, it's that lifelong learning approach. I mean, Carl, what's your view as someone who does have a lot more local connection with businesses here about their difficulties at times to find the skills they need when there is such high unemployment?
Yeah, I think that there's two sides to it. There's the skills they need and also the opportunities to bring more people into work. And until the demand side is there, every small business owner in this room knows that they're not going to employ more people purely out of benevolence. They need to have good reason to bring people on. And it would be phenomenal if the economic situation was right, that every small business owner in Townsville could employ one more person. And that would make such a dramatic difference to the unemployment situation. In terms of training people, I think it's a two-way street. You need to have people that want to learn and want to increase their skills as well. I think one of the big problems we have is that it's too easy not to work. So is the social welfare system too strong and creating a disincentive to actually training and reskilling and getting back into the workforce? I think that's a real problem. We see that playing out regionally as well.
Are you saying something like New Start allowance is too high?
Whether it's the New Start allowance or just the overall package of social welfare mechanisms, I just think, yeah, the overall package is too strong to create the incentive to go and work.
Jennifer, I'll get a response from you on that because I'm not sure if that'll be a popular view.
Look, I think the New Start allowance is a problem. I think it's too low, actually, because you actually need to give people the wherewithal to go back to work. And if they actually can't put food on the table, if they become homeless, if their circumstances get worse and worse and worse, the idea that they're going to be able to kind of quickly re-enter the labour market is very difficult. There's a different problem that Carl's talking about here, which I think is, have we got all of the incentives lined up? Have we got the job services networks working properly? Are they putting people into the right training? Are they giving people impossible hurdles to overcome? Are they assessing what people's capabilities are? Why are we failing so miserably on literacy and numeracy? Why aren't we giving people kind of digital apprentices, I call them, so they can quickly get their digital skills up and then they can get back into work? This has got to be a sort of whole-of-person approach where you say, let's look at this person's skills, their capabilities, their history. What is it going to take to get that person back into the workforce successfully? And that's where the welfare system, to Carl's point, has got to kind of incentivise people going to work. That's not always just about the amount, although, as you know, I think the New Start allowance is way too low. But it's also got to be that everything is lined up to get people into work and keep them in work. There's no point getting people into work for 4 weeks and then they just drop off again and then they re-enter the cycle of misery. Let's get them into jobs where they can stay.
And then there's the debate currently being had about wages and the minimum wage. Bill Shorten's this week announced his plans as to what the Fair Work Commission would have to look at in setting the minimum wage to make it more of a living wage. What can businesses here in Townsville afford, though, when it comes to any increase in the minimum wage, Carl?
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the sector you're in. So that we see always a lot of variations between the different sectors of our economy. So right now, building and construction's had a big kick along on the back of the floods. Subject to their ability to increase prices and recover more from their customers, then they do have a better ability to pay a better wage. Having said that, though, not every business is doing as well. So all the businesses that were flooded, the last thing they need is a higher wages bill as they try and get back up on their feet again after being flooded and knocked for six. So for me, it's a very fine
that sort of blanket approach of increasing the minimum wage by a large amount is going to knock some around.
Absolutely. Not every business here could afford that. Not every business here is making money as it is.
Yep.
So how can they afford a higher cost? I would have thought it's far better to encourage every business to keep employing the people they do employ rather than have to share their tight wages bill across the same number of employees. Yeah. Inevitably, I think you would see some people losing their jobs if the wages bill for each individual were to increase.
Let's get some questions from the floor. We've got one right in the middle there, thank you. We'll just get a microphone to you, one moment.
Thank you very much to the panel. My name is Wendy Tubman. I would first of all like to say that all of Townsville does not support Adani. There are very many thousands and thousands of people in Townsville who do not approve of an increase in the coal mining industry at a time, as Jennifer says, when the scientists have told us that we are going to see more climate change, we are going to see more and more weather events such as we have just seen. We didn't just have the floods in Townsville, we had the fires in Tasmania, we had the drought out west, we had heat waves across the entire country. We've got to acknowledge, and our leaders have got to acknowledge, that unfortunately we cannot have a bob each way, or even two bob each way. The science is telling us, the IPCC came out in their last report and said, we have 12 years left. 12 years left in which we can prevent runaway climate change. I'm sorry that it's not possible to have both a foot in each camp. Yes, we can have transition, but make it serious. Don't open new coal mines or new gas fields and expect that you're going to have a great future. So where can we see the leadership? The Business Council has signed on to the Paris Agreement. Where can we see the leadership that's going to really put teeth behind this movement away from fossil fuels?
Wendy, thank you. And look, this is a legitimate view held by many, as we've mentioned. Jennifer, what's your response to that? Can you support reducing emissions while also opening coal mines?
Well, leaving the specific new coal mine issue aside, I mean, there are a whole set of reasons about whether or you should or shouldn't open a new coal mine. And the first question, of course, is what problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying to bring power bills down, give more reliable power? Are you trying to build a new coal mine? I think, that's actually the question there. Look, I understand this point of view. That the difficulty is this. The problem we've had, and we've had so many false starts at this for a decade, is that we have not been honest with people about the scale of adjustment. We haven't. We promise people that there will be no change, that we can make this, and that we won't have job losses, that we won't see industries fade away. And the simple truth is we will. And we have got to stop lying to people that you can do these things and there is no adjustment to the economy. You can't. And so then the next question becomes, going back to my earlier point, what is it we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve a lower emissions economy in line with our international commitments, or are we trying to wipe some industries out? I want us to achieve a lower emissions economy. I want us to drive companies to invest in the best technology they can. I don't want us to have a philosophical, ideological view that says we won't be satisfied until we've seen certain industries wiped out. That is not what Australians, I think, want. And we have got to stop telling people that you can just do all of this and life will go on. You can't. And this is the great problem. And the final point is, if the level of adjustment is so severe, the Australian community will rightly push back on it. And it's interesting, you look at the Americans. Now, love them or hate them, they are going to exceed their Paris target. They're cutting their emissions because they've released their gas. And people can't have it both ways. They can't say, we don't want gas, we don't want nuclear, we only want renewables, well, what do you do about reliability? We'll worry about that later. We don't want coal, and this is the kind of dishonesty of the debate. And we benchmark ourselves to countries in Europe. Countries who say, well, we've got a 100% renewable energy target. Oh, yes, we just didn't mention to people that we buy nuclear power from France, we import coal power from Poland. What I want us to have is an honest debate, a seriously truthful debate with the community that this adjustment will cost. It will cost in power bills, it will cost in changes to industries, and this idea that all these eco jobs are going to come flooding in, good luck with that.
But if we're going to be honest, if it is going to cost industries, where is that going to happen?
I mean, you just have to look at the data. I mean, it's clearly going to affect the trade-exposed sector the most, and it's clearly going to affect obviously the emissions-intensive sector. Now, that's where...
And isn't that Adani? It's going to trade this coal, it's emissions intensive.
But the question then becomes, what kind of economy do we want? Do we want to actually de-industrialise the economy? Or do we want to move to a more efficient industrial platform?
Is that the choice we've got to make?
And that is the choice we're going to make. And
so what's the Business Council's choice on that?
Well, to get we have always said you need a price signal that changes the technological equation for companies, that changes the investment equation, but that is not about switching from one fuel to another in this kind of binary way. It's not about saying coal is bad, renewables are good. It's about saying incentivise companies to be more efficient, not just in the production of energy, but in the consumption of energy. That is what a price signal was always meant to do. But we get into this kind of stuff about, when you really unpack a lot of the kind of agenda here from the far left and the Greens, if I may say this, it is not about that. It is about we will not be satisfied until every coal-fired power station in this country is shut. We will not be satisfied until every coal mine is shut. And then we'll just keep going. And then it'll be cement. And then it'll be asphalt. And then it will be, let's stop the one last refinery in this country and see how we go when we are totally dependent, even though our reserves are down. This is the dishonesty, David, that we have just got to stop doing in this country.
In fairness to the Greens, I think they've been pretty open today about exactly what you lay out there. That's kind of what they want to do. I don't know if anyone else wanted to weigh in with an answer on that. Otherwise, we'll go to another question from the floor. Do we have... yes, just down... Thank you.
Hi, Joan Arledge. Thank you for your panel. I just want to bring it back to Townsville and the impact on business from the floods and so on. It would be remiss of me not to just mention the Small Business Recovery Centre, which is at 143 Walker Street, and any businesses that are flood impacted can hop in there. There are mentors to help support businesses through their new normal, such as we're dealing with now, and also advice on the government grants and concessional loans that are quite useful. But just on the impact of how this is affecting our Townsville business community, and it's pretty dramatic. The statistics on business recovery post-disasters like the floods are not great, and we have an initial bubble, as we're seeing now, with up to $1 billion worth of insurance money coming in and government grants and so on, which certainly helps and is very welcome. But you then have the inevitable drop-off. I mean, the consumer markets are all changed now. If you get a new car now, you're not going to need a new car for some years, and so on and so forth. What do you think? I'm particularly interested in hearing from Debbie from the Chamber and also Jennifer from the Business Council in terms of what do you think we should be looking for long-term sustainable recovery? What do we need to provide to businesses in order that we're still all here in 5 to 10 years' time and thriving?
That's a really good question. Debbie, to you first. How do you make it last?
Well, one is actually identifying. Yes, we, from ringing around other centres that have experienced disasters like this, is to understand what the situation is. And yes, that there will probably be a sugar hit here for our city for about 18 months, thereabouts. So identifying that and communicating that. So businesses, as they are gearing up and putting on those extra people and dealing with the situation here and now, is to be aware that this will happen in the medium, short-term future. So this is where then the plan is to work very closely with the TALs of the region to be able to make sure that those longer-term projects are not off the boil. You know, we've got a water issue that's affected the city. It is now the time that we need to be working on our water solution to make sure that it is solved once and for all for the region. It's not to drop off just because we've got enough water, it's to lobby even harder to make sure that stage 2 goes ahead, the feasibility for the Hells Gate Dam, and it just stays on the top of mind, absolutely. And then to keep an eye on these bigger projects, like a little bit what we were talking about before with the job and skill shortages. A lot of the jobs that are available in Townsville are a much higher skill set, and we need to be able to provide more entry-level jobs available, and things like the battery plant and that manufacturing type role needs a real focus for the area so that we can actually provide those entry-level jobs for people to be able to take up and then continue to upskill into these higher roles.
Jennifer, did you want to add to that? And I guess picking up on what Deb's saying there about the need to seize the opportunity to make sure the infrastructure rebuild is done as best it can be to secure for the future.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this issue that others have raised about you need a kind of 15-year infrastructure, regional economic development strategy. The infrastructure's got to be tied to that. You know, as you and I have been around the country, David, Infrastructure Australia's got to prioritise those things based on kind of regions where we really need 5 or 6 critical projects. I think there's some other things that could be done that are kind of quite practical. We were at AIR yesterday. I think making sure that as businesses rebuild, they rebuild into the digital economy too. So making sure everybody is able to use Twitter, Facebook, TripAdvisor, Trivago, and we're going to look at that. You know, is there a way for the companies that actually are members of the BCA to help small businesses make sure that they are in rebuilding absolutely at the top of the digital game, because that actually gives them some assurance. And the other thing I would do is just encourage everybody to sign up to the Business Council's code for paying people on time and in 30 days. What you can't have as you recover is people dragging the chain on paying people on time. And it's crucial that all of us now respect the needs of a small business to be paid in 30 days, pay on time, and help people get into that electronic invoicing. I mean, Carl, I've talked about that many times, but this is the opportunity to rebuild, particularly the digital platforms.
Do we have another question? Got one in the middle there.
Thank you. Thanks, panel members. In 2015, we had an agenda that was announced, the Northern Australia Development Agenda. Where is the debate, the argument gone in relation to what that was going to deliver for the North? This was truly to be a vision about how all of these major sectors that we've discussed this afternoon, resource, agriculture, how that was going to come together to position Northern Australia's role in the global economy more broadly. We've seen to have lost momentum in that discussion. Surely at this point, in the lead up to a federal election, this is what the North should be revisiting and pushing with our federal leaders.
I think that's a terrific question too. I mean, how many times have we heard about developing the North? We now have a Northern Australia Infrastructure Investment Fund. Are we getting enough from that? Do we need to come back to the bigger picture? And who wants to tee off on that one first? Carl.
My perspective on that, and thank you, Michael, is that, again, we don't have sufficient alignment between levels of government. We've got a bunch of business people in this room who are trying their hearts out to build Townsville, but there's headwinds against that. We need a strong railway line to Mount Isa, but we don't seem to have a state government willing to put the capital in to actually fix that rail line once and for all, not just leave it as it currently is, do a band-aid job on it. We need the water infrastructure. We need that enabling infrastructure to create new business opportunities in Northern Australia. And yet we have a federal government that I think has started it well. Maybe there's some issues with the NAIF that certainly need to be refined, but then we need our state government coming in behind and actually supporting it. We see the Northern Territory in some economic trouble, but when they actually can get things going, the Northern Territory can be quite powerful because it's just the Territory government working pretty much on their own without sort of our southeast corner with a different agenda to the rest of us in northern and western Queensland. So for me, Michael, we need that political alignment again to make it work.
Well, I guess this comes back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of not just a Townsville city deal, but something broader, something more regional. I mean, could you have a Far North Queensland regional deal?
I'd love to see something like that, to get everyone to the table. To start with, between our regions, we need to agree on what the key projects are for northern and western Queensland.
And you've got Infrastructure Australia, right, that look at what each region needs, and they have a priority list, Jennifer, and we see that every year put out, and it's got presumably some of these very projects on it. Why can't we sit down with Infrastructure Australia, the three levels of government across this region, and say, here's what needs to be done?
So we do have Infrastructure Australia, and I think, overall they do a good job in which the parameters that they're operating in. But the reality behind Infrastructure Australia's priority list is that the economics just don't stack for infrastructure in Northern Australia. And that's where our major priority projects will never beat a Cross River Rail or a new airport in Sydney. Because it's about population, and it's about your BCRs and your MPVs, and it's difficult. Yeah. So what Northern Australia actually needs is not just, you need a business case. It's taxpayers' dollars at the end of the day, so there does need to be some proven, analysis on these projects. But at the end of the day, Northern Australia will be built on political vision and will, and partnering with communities like ours. If you look at James Cook University, that was a political decision that was made, and you can only imagine what this city would have been if there was no university here today. So there does need to be that extra appetite. I will acknowledge Minister Canavan in the new Infrastructure Australia release, which that will come out this year. He is bringing a Northern Australia segment into it because he knows we can't compete with capital city requirements. But I can tell you from a project that will get, someone in our cities to work 8 minutes earlier to another project that's going to open up, say for Hell's Gates, 50,000 hectares of agricultural land, you can see the dynamics and the changes these projects can make if they're invested into.
It just needs a longer term return, time frame, right? All right. I think we probably have time for one more question from the floor. Do we have anyone else? Last chance? No? Okay. Well, just maybe we can sum it up then. Just the takeaways, Jennifer, in terms of what business here can do, coming back to the projects that we've heard about. Adani's obviously not universally loved, but stronger support here than anywhere, I'm sure, if they want
Absolutely.
to see it happen. How do they get that voice heard? How do we get a greater focus on the regional infrastructure needs that may not have the great payoff of a big city project down south? How does this region...
Well, I think business has got to come together, and I mean that's the role that Deb and Trish and Carl and others play. I think the most important thing is to try and get a sense of, here's where we want to be in 15 years, here are the projects and things. In the short term, making sure that the recovery is not just a kind of fix, but it's actually a kind of repositioning so the economy gets stronger. Pushing hard about the skills and training staff, pushing hard for the TAFE to be well funded. I think the crucial thing is when communities come together, and you and I have seen this as we've travelled around the country, and they speak with one voice, not 20,000 or not 20, it is very difficult for people to sort of to shut down their voice. And so my kind of advice to people is speak as much as you can as united voice. Be clear about that priority list. Be clear that some things have to happen first, and that if everything has to, to be fair to governments, if everything has to happen all at once, they can't do anything. And start sort of thinking about how do we get our projects in the queue. One thing I think Australia has to do is change the way we do cost-benefit analysis, because the Harbour Bridge wouldn't have been built if it had been built under a cost-benefit analysis. So, we've got to find a different way of assessing the value of these big projects in places like Northern Australia, because it's a strategic value. And as Trish said, if we're successful in Northern Queensland, if we're successful in other regions, the country is more successful. We've got to stop thinking that Australia is the east coast, southeast coast of Sydney, Melbourne and maybe a bit of the Gold Coast. It's not. And if we say we want Australia to succeed, then it's a strategic imperative to have North Queensland succeed.
James, maybe I'll finish with you. What would you say, having heard some of the views here, to other business leaders in Sydney or Melbourne, Brisbane, about the opportunities here? Yes, the risks, as we started out discussing, but the opportunities here as well.
And look, I can't speak for all industries, but what I'd say for us is that our footprint in North Queensland is as much about our ability to have a representative voice within the community and understand, the inherent risks that are there. I think if you're not here to be sitting in Sydney sort of preaching to insurers and other interested parties on what the challenges are of the industry from Sydney or Melbourne, I think is just disingenuous. So having that, ability to be there and be part of the community. But for us as a business, and we've got 40 offices around the country, and we've actually, we're actually a global company. We're not an Australian company. But for us to have representation in North Queensland, it actually informs so many more things within our business as we think about, again, how we can better help our customer base, because our customer base runs from Darwin to Hobart. And at the end of the day, if you're trying to draw on experience, again, just from the major capital cities, you're not going to be able to find that true understanding and ability to represent those organisations that, we purport to represent.
You've got to be here to actually understand our country better. Look, we will have to leave it there, but please thank all of our panel. Terrific conversation this afternoon. Thank you all. And thank you for some great questions for coming along today as well. There are, I think, survey forms on each table. Please fill those out. They'll be very helpful for the Business Council in some takeaways from this lunch as well. And stick around for a chat with anyone up here as well. I'm sure there'll be time to do that. So thanks once again, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Cheers.